Hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to start using the AWS command line, and it's often referred to as the CLI, and you can actually install the command line both on your laptops, on your desktop computers. You can have them running on EC2 instances, so that's what we're going to do in this lab. But the command line is really powerful, and we'll see why in this lab. So if you've got the time, log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console, and I'm just going to go over to EC2, and I've currently got an EC2 instance running. What I'm going to go in and do is just terminate that now. Just go ahead and hit terminate because I want to start from scratch. And what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go ahead and launch a new instance. Now we're going to use an Amazon Linux AMI, and if you actually read the description, it says the default image includes the AWS command line tools. So the command line is pre-installed on Amazon Linux AMIs. If you do want to install the command line tools on your own Windows PC or on your Mac, you can just type in AWS CLI installation and then follow the documentation through there. So I'm going to go ahead and use an Amazon Linux AMI. I'm going to use a T2 micro, and I'm just going to leave everything as default. Now, if you remember, we created some roles earlier on, and in particular this role, the S3 admin access role. Ignore this DynamoDB role, that was me messing around. But we don't want to leave, we're going to leave the roles as none for now. So we just leave this as none. And in fact, just leave everything as the default and go ahead and hit next to add your storage. Leave that as default as well, and we'll just call this my web server, and go ahead and hit next. I'm going to go into an existing security group, so I'm going to use my web DMZ. I'm going to go ahead and hit review and launch, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit launch, and I'm going to use my existing key pair, my EC2 key pair. Okay, so that is now launching. It will take a couple of minutes to fire up. While that's happening, I'm going to go back over to here. I'm going to go into services, and we're going to go into identity access management. And what I want to do is create a new user. So let's go into users, and in here I'm going to add a user, and I'm just going to call this user my CLI user. Okay, and we're going to say the access type is we want programmatic access. So we want an access key ID and secret access key because we're going to be using the AWS CLI command line interface. So go ahead and hit next. Now, if you remember from the IAM section of the course, we had a couple of groups, and we can add the user to this group. What I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to attach existing policies directly to this user. And in the policy, I'm just going to type in admin access. So I want this person to be able to do basically anything. So just go in here and click on that. Go ahead and hit next, and go ahead and create our user. And so that will create our user, and we'll get, if we click in here, our access key ID and our secret access key. So go ahead and copy this down into Notepad, or you can actually just click the download CSV file, which I've done there. So now we've created our user, and we've given our user root access. We've given them complete access to our AWS account. So the next thing we want to do is just go back over to EC2 and see if our EC2 instance is ready to rock. So just go into EC2 in here, and there you go, my web server, so it's ready to go. And then I'm just going to click in here and copy the public IP address, and then you'll need to go over to your terminal window, and you will need to SSH into your EC2 instance. Okay, so I'm in my terminal window right now, and what I'm going to do is just type in SSH EC2-user at, and then the IP address, then -i, and then my EC2 key pair.pem, and it's going to give me this warning message. I'm going to go ahead and hit yes, and there we go. So we've connected in to our EC2 instance. I'm going to elevate my privileges to root, and now I'm just going to clear the screen. So I'm in the EC2 user directory, and what I want to do now is I'm going to try and use the AWS command line. So we invoke the command line just by typing AWS, then we select the service we want to use. So in this case, we're going to look at S3. And then we're going to type in ls. So we want to see all our buckets in S3. Now we're going to hit enter, but of course it says unable to locate credentials. You can configure credentials by running AWS configure. So that's exactly what we're going to do now, AWS configure, and it's going to ask us for our access key ID and our secret access key. So you need to go over to that CSV file that you downloaded. Okay, so here I am in that CSV file. If we just go over, we can see in here it says access key ID. So you just want to copy and paste that and put that back into your terminal window. So access key ID, there we go. And our secret access key is the next one along. And just go ahead and copy and paste that into your clipboard and then put that back into your terminal and hit enter. Now the next thing it's going to ask you for is your default region name. If you don't know which region you want, just type into Google something like AWS region list and select this link here. So AWS regions and endpoints. And of course, I'm in London right now. So I want to use the one for EC2 for London. And you can just scroll down and grab it from here. So make sure you use regions, and you've got to copy and paste this specifically. So it's EU West -2. You don't want to confuse it with like availability zones, for example. And so just go back over to your, over to your terminal window, paste that in, and then just hit enter again for the default output format. And then hopefully, I'm just going to clear the screen, but hopefully that would work. So if we type in AWS S3 LS, we now have a list of all my buckets, and I can see all my buckets from around the world because S3 is global. So I can see my buckets in London, I can see my bucket that sits in Sydney that's hosting a CloudFront site, etc. Now, if you want to know what each command does, type in AWS, the service, and then you can just type in help, and it will give you a list of commands, and you can scroll all the way down. My monitor is not very good in terms of being able to view right now because I make my text really big so you guys can actually see what I'm doing. But if I scroll all the way down, it says available commands. So we've got CP, which is going to be copy, LS, which is to list a directory, MB to make a bucket, MV to move things around, etc., etc. So you can hit Control C to come out of that. Okay, so let's look at where these credentials are being stored. So what you do is you type in CD space and then tilde, and that will take you to the home directory. And then in here, if you just type in ls, you'll see that there's no directories, but that's because there's a hidden directory. So type in cd.aws and then type in ls, and you'll see two files in here, config and credentials. So if we type in nano credentials and hit enter, you'll be able to see your access key ID and your secret access key in here. Now, it is being stored locally on your EC2 instance. So what does that actually mean? Well, I've got port 22 open to the world right now, and if somebody got a hold of my private key, they'd be able to SSH into my EC2 instance, and then they would be able to get my credentials just by going to the home directory, going to .aws, and then opening up this file. And with these credentials, I can install the command line on my PC, on my laptop, on a physical device, anywhere in the world, and I can actually access my AWS account using these credentials. So if you lose these credentials or somebody steals them, they can go in and start provisioning huge EC2 instances to do things like Bitcoin mining. And what a lot of developers make a mistake doing is storing these credentials in their code, uploading their code to GitHub, and essentially there's automated software out there that scans GitHub all the time looking for AWS credentials, because as soon as they've got them, they can then go in and access your AWS account. Now, for that reason, credentials are not all that secure. So if you are using EC2 and you want to be able to make command line calls using EC2, there's a more secure way to do it, and that's called roles, and we're going to go into that in the very next lab. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to come out of this and go Control X. I'm going to clear the screen, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this EC2 instance self-destruct. So to do that, I need to get the instance ID. So type in AWS EC2 and then describe and then hyphen instances, and this will describe all my instances that are currently running within EC2. It will also describe terminated instances. So if I scroll all the way up, you can see here it's in JSON format. So you can see here this particular instance, the first one is terminated. And if I scroll down, I should be able to find my web server. Here we go. If I just scroll up, you can see in here you can see in here under state it's running, so that this one is live, and I've only got 2 EC2 instances running, and you can also see my public IP address here. So I'm just going to grab the instance ID, which is this one here. I'm going to go copy, and then I'm just going to clear the screen again to make it easy to see, and I'm going to type AWS EC2 terminate -instances, and then instances, I think it's instance ID, might be instances IDs, and then paste it in here and hit enter. And there we go. I have just terminated the EC2 instance that I was running the AWS command line from. So it has basically self-destructed my EC2 instance. So why don't you go back to the AWS console? Okay, so I'm back in the AWS console. Just go over to EC2 and make sure I've definitely terminated that instance, and you can see there it is shutting down. Now, the very last thing you should probably do is just go back to IAM and delete that user, because it's a massive security risk. I try not to use users for the command line wherever possible, but if you are using it on your laptop or on your desktop or anything outside of AWS, then you will need a user with programmatic access. So I'm going to click in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit delete users, and it will say the following user will be permanently deleted, including all user data. Hit yes, delete. And now that user no longer exists, and now my AWS account is secure again. So if you do ever accidentally upload your code to GitHub and it has your access key ID and secret access key, that's the only way to really resolve the issue is to go in and delete the user and recreate a new user, or you can go in and regenerate the access key ID and secret access key, but you should do it immediately because it is a big security risk. Okay, so that's it for this lecture, guys. In the next lecture, we're going to look at how we can get away from using user access keys and move over to using roles. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.